October. Board Now back with Rachel McDonald. And on this video, we're going to start a new franchise because we recently finished our last franchise, which was Final Destination movies. So going for something a bit more older and traditional with this one, and a mammoth franchise it is as well. But we're going to be reviewing the Frankenstein series of movies. Not all of them, because there's a ridiculous number, but you can expect a good amount anyway. Sort of a wide range, really, starting from the very early ones, going to the more modern era. Starting right back at the original Universal Monsters version, which is directed by James Whale. It came out in 1931. And it stars Colin Clive as the creator Frankenstein, although not called Victor for some reason in this, which is bizarre. And you've got, like the familiar characters, Eagles in there as well. And you've got the horror legend Boris Karloff playing the monster itself of Frankenstein. I could do a plot setup, but I feel like I would be patronising you to give a plot setup for Frankenstein. This is, of course, the first movie, so this is where the experiment is taking place, and midway through the movie, we actually get Frankenstein, or the monster of Frankenstein, I should say. Lots of people make that mistake, but this starts off with the build-up and the lead-up to that, and you have the character of the inventor Frankenstein, who is one of these. This was like the very early version of the mad scientist who kind of is getting so caught up in his work and like the hubris that he's not always thinking about the consequences. And at the same time, we see the various ways he's trying to make this experiment comes off. He's like being sort of cut adrift by his professor who thinks, he's getting a bit too cocky and this isn't the best. And at the same time, he's engaged to be married. So that's like a subplot in the movie. This is the introduction to the monster, and a lot of the focus is on the creator in this, the Frankenstein character. Like Colin Clive really carries a lot of the big moments of the movie. So what do you think of this one?
I actually quite enjoyed this film while I was watching it. Now, I haven't seen this before. I've mentioned, I think, on other videos that we've done that I am not massively enamored with old Hollywood. I don't love older movies, and I do feel sometimes that film critics and film fans can get a bit snobby when people admit that they don't love older movies. Like I think it's just a taste thing. But I actually really quite enjoyed this. I thought that it was a really well-paced movie. I liked the fact that it wasn't overly long. It didn't feel overly packed. I mean, the only version of Frankenstein that I have seen is the Kenneth Branagh one from the 90s, which is a very, very dramatic retelling of the story. So I have only ever seen that one with all of its big cinematography and big production and everything. So it was really nice to see the story in like a very basic form. I also should mention I haven't read the novel, so I actually don't know how close this is to the novel. As Keith said, it sounds like the second movie was actually closer than this one. But I thought this one was really good. I really thought it was very atmospheric. As I was watching it, I was trying to watch it both from this perspective and also trying to keep in mind how an audience would react to this kind of movie in the 1930s. I liked that they had that little narrator come out at the beginning and basically say, this is a shocking movie. Some things might scare you, obviously because this was right at the beginning of cinema when they hadn't really done this sort of thing. And I thought that, it established everything really well. I thought, in such a short time, I thought the dialogue and the actors established the characters really well, particularly Frankenstein himself. As you said, the actor who plays him does a very good job. You really get that sense of like arrogance and you're pushing the boundaries too far. I always like this theme in Frankenstein that you've seen in other movies. Even just recent movies like Oppenheimer, this thing of like, if we can do it, should we do it? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And you very much see that in this movie. Boris Karloff is obviously just brilliant. Like that performance, even today, is still so chilling. And as we start to talk about different scenes, we can talk about how disturbing some of these scenes really quite were, especially for the time it was made. I also really I found myself finding that this film doesn't really have a score, and I found that the absence of the score actually really worked. It made some of the scenes really uncomfortable because you were having to watch them without music, and music can kind of take you out of scenes. It gives you like a bit of a comfort thing and says, this is how you're supposed to feel. But when you don't have the music, you're just left with like your bare emotions. So yeah, I thought it worked really well. I thought, like I said, when I was watching it, it is a short movie, but even like short movies can drag sometimes, whereas this I felt was really well paced and went really well. And basically watching this, I can understand now why it's become such a classic and why so many people reference it, and how many times it has been referenced in other media and the influence that it's had. So this was actually a really fun experience for me, watching something new, watching a movie I wouldn't normally watch that's a bit outside of my comfort zone and watching. And I had a really fun time watching it. What about you? I assume that you've seen this one before and this is a rewatch for you?
Yeah, this is a rewatch.
Mm.
Probably. I think I only really watched it for the first time a few years ago because
Mm.
I do have like the box set of the original Universal Monster movie,
Yeah.
which is a nice box set. But
Mm.
yeah, so this was, I think, my second time with this one, and I like it as well. It's a good sort of basic introduction to this sort of thing. You do get some quite good themes about, like, obviously science and hubris, like you said. And Colin Clive, who plays Frankenstein, I think is very good, very charismatic. He does Unhinged very well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's got a lot of energy and very expressive, and it's well directed by James Whale. Like, I think the introduction, I do like that introduction. That's, yeah, breaking the fourth wall, which
Yeah.
didn't really happen at this point in cinema. So that's fun to see that this far back. And yeah, no, it has a nice little gothic sort of tone to it with the black and white photography, and like those early shots in the graveyard were really setting the mood. And yeah, it'll definitely be interesting when we get to Bride of Frankenstein and seeing the difference for, because Boris Karloff, I agree, is very good. Like, he's the only one you can really picture. I mean, certainly at this point, playing that role, and he's very physical presence, and like does manage, because I think one of the differences between this and Bride, which we'll get to, but like I think Bride does play more on the monster's humanity, and like tries to
No,
make a
okay.
little bit of sympathy, because you get the whole thing with the mob mentality at the end, and that's another interesting theme to see in a movie this far back. But I also think in some ways this played it a bit more straight, where he is kind of the monster, like, but he doesn't quite know what he's doing, and like the film makes that clear. Then he's not a malicious monster, but
Yes.
at the same time, I think because you don't get a lot, like as much time with him as like the Frankenstein character in this one.
Mm.
Whereas I think the second movie is more focused because he's obviously already been revealed and stuff. Movie, it obviously has the classic thing of slowly building up to the monster and its reveal, which I thought that's a cornerstone of like classic horror, really, and especially when it's for the first time. I mean,
Yes.
in a sequel, it's like in a way all bets are off. Like,
Yeah.
people already know from the first one this is what it is, but when it's that first movie, yeah, I think it's important to slowly build to it. Complaint with the film that drags it down a little bit is I feel like they spend too long at the wedding, like those scenes.
I
And
agree. Yeah, I
it,
agree. Yeah.
yeah, those scenes feel like padding a bit too much, and
Yes.
it just feels like they're just doing it to like pass the time until we get to the point where the monster shows up and like terrorizes them,
Yeah.
and some of those characters weren't really that interesting to watch.
No, like they had Frankenstein's father, I think it was, and he was kind of a very over the top, like almost a bit of a caricature. And yeah, he took up quite a bit of screen time. And then the fiance, I mean, I wanted to kind of like her, but there wasn't a lot to grab onto there. She's basically just there to kind of, be Frankenstein's like moral compass, like, oh, you can't do this, you're a good man. And then, at the end, she has, her intuition is like, oh, something's wrong, which, by the way, women always know when something's wrong. And there's always some dude just telling us to calm down. You're just getting excited when Frankenstein tried to do that. So yeah, I do get what you mean, and I do agree. Like when we got towards the end and we got to that wedding scene, I was like, okay, it feels like we're just cooling our heels a little bit, just waiting for, like you said, just waiting for the monster to arrive. But I mean, even those scenes I didn't think got dragged on too much. It definitely could have been worse. But I do definitely get where you're coming from with that, and I agree that they did a really good job with the build up and the reveal. I particularly think that the animation scene was really good. When they were showing like the machine working,
Sure.
and they had all the lightning and all of the thunder, and I thought some of the sets were really fun. Like I thought that the set of the laboratory was really fun, and they had a lot of fun with like shadows and light and dark. And I think the creature reveal was really good, like the fact that he kind of walks in backwards and then turns around. It's very unsettling and kind of shows you that he's still he's kind of like a brainless creature. And I kind of agree, like in this one, he's not as sympathetic, but I do still think that they show that, it's not entirely his fault. You have that scene where the Igor character is kind of taunting him, and, he ends up killing him. And you can't really fault the monster for it, because it's like he doesn't quite understand what's happening. Someone is coming at him, trying to scare him, and he just reacts with violence because he doesn't know any better. And I think that's a really interesting theme. And you obviously see this in all the Frankenstein adaptations, of him not understanding what can cause harm and what is a game. And then again, you see that later on with the scene with the little girl. And I think that this movie does that very well. And like I said, I think Boris Karloff's performance really adds to that, because I think he's very good physically, and I think that he portrays that kind of helplessness of the monster. The thing, he's literally just been born. He's trying to navigate the world, and shortly after he's born, he's exposed to fire and violence and things that he doesn't understand. So I think the movie does portray that quite well. And again, I think Karloff is very good at portraying the monster. I think for me, he was the best part of the film. I mean, the guy who played Frankenstein was very, very good, but I really liked Karloff's performance, and I found myself being both very disturbed and feeling very sorry for the monster. And I think that this movie did a good job of kind of balancing that sympathy and horror towards the creature, or the monster rather. It was an angle that I really liked.
Yeah, and that scene with Igor, I think, is one of the big ones for doing that. Like, because that does go a bit darker than you would expect this sort of movie, this sort of period to do. And yeah, that's definitely a big one in turning your sympathies and painting Igor as the villain. Definitely, there is actually like a funny scene near the start with Igor. The one when he breaks into the lab and he's got those brains. I think they were brains, and
the brains.
And it was like they're labeled jars, like it's something like criminal, non-criminal,
criminal mind.
Yeah, that's
good brain.
Hilarious. Yeah.
That is a funny scene also, because you also have a bit of physicality in that scene, because he walks in and he walks into that skeleton that's like hanging, and he gets like scared by the skeleton, and then he knocks the jar to the ground. And so that is a fun scene. And I think the guy who played Igor was good. The physicality of him, he did the role quite well, I think.
Yeah, like I think the main roles they cast really well, and it's a bit of a trend, like this era of movies. I think a lot of times the supporting roles don't get cast as well, for whatever reason, and maybe that's an area we've made progress in, because now you tend to get a lot of attention put on the supporting roles as well.
Yeah.
But
it's very well directed, this movie. I thought, like I said, some of the lighting was really good, the way they play with the shadows, the camera angles, it moves really well. And I think he places the characters very well within the scenes. And given that it is such a short film, I think that he establishes the characters really well with the time that they've got. And some of these scenes are just so well done. Like I said, the animation scene I found to be so, so good. But of course, that scene with the little girl by the lake is one of the most chilling scenes, and so well done. And it's obviously been referenced in so much other media. I mean, even Buffy references it with Adam coming across the little boy. So,
Sure, yeah.
there's I think for that scene, I think that scene more than any other scene really shows how childlike the monster is, because he's sitting with this little girl who doesn't show him any fear, so he's happy to sit down with her, and then they're throwing the flowers into the lake, and then the fact that he doesn't understand that the little girl is not a flower, and he just throws her into the lake and he doesn't understand what's happening. I think that really reiterates that whole, this creature doesn't know what it is, it doesn't know how the world works, it needs someone to teach it, but it's been abandoned by its maker. And that, I think, is also a theme that pops up in adaptations, because I definitely remember that being in the Kenneth Branagh one, this kind of almost like what happens when a child is abandoned by its parent, because that is kind of what happens to the monster. And I think that's why towards the climax of the film, the monster takes Frankenstein hostage, because it's like, you abandoned me, you're supposed to be my creator, or the person that made me, and then you abandoned me at the first sign of that something was wrong. And again, I think that also goes into like science and failed silent science experiments, the way we abandon projects, what happens, can they get out of control, all of that, I think can be packed into this. But yeah, I think those themes come through quite clearly in this movie, in a very succinct way. I actually made a note here. I said, this feels like a short story come to life. This feels like what a short story should feel like on the screen. Like these days, it feels like when they adapt short stories, they just put in so much extra padding, because apparently no one today wants to sit through a movie that's less than 2 hours long, which is just bullshit. Some of the best movies can be shorter movies, and I feel like we need to go back to that, because when you have a shorter movie, everything has to be more succinct. It has to be, more well put together. You don't have time to kind of meander around. And I think that this movie was actually really good when it came to that, and really got to the point. And like I said, I didn't feel like it really lagged that much, except for those maybe few scenes at the wedding.
About 70 minutes long,
Yes.
which is a good length, and yeah, they sort of do everything. And you're right. I mean, considering that's not really that long at all, and you've got a fair amount of the story to do, because there's a build up to him being revealed. Like that only happens about halfway through, and then there's other stuff going on with Frankenstein and his engagement. So yeah, they do pack quite a lot in, but it doesn't really feel rushed. It sort of feels like quite a full story. So it's definitely stuff they expand on in the sequel. So we'll see how we go with that one.
And I have to say, the end scene, the mob scene, I mean, mass hysteria, no matter what time movie it's in, always gets to me a little bit. But I have to say, that end scene with them all chasing him actually felt for me quite reminiscent of the 1925 Phantom of the Opera, the first Phantom of the Opera that was put to film, because that ends in a similar way. So it's, and it was filmed in a similar way, with a mob chasing the Phantom down. This one was obviously through the streets of Paris and not, through the wilderness, but it has that similar feel. And again, it's that similar theme of like a misunderstood monster being chased to his doom by a mob that maybe doesn't understand him. Now, obviously, in Phantom of the Opera, the Phantom is a little bit more, murdery. He's not like Frankenstein, who's just kind of a child. But again, it had that similar theme, and it was a movie that came out at a similar time. And it will be interesting going forward in this franchise to see if they do any other scenes like that, because, angry mobs, no matter what time frame you're in, will always remain the same. People feed off hysteria, they feed off one another's fears, and of course, towards the climax of the movie, you see that. And I will admit, the scene where they were burning down the windmill with the monster inside, that was another scene that I found quite disturbing, because again, I thought Boris Karloff and his panic and his fear in that scene was very, very good and very intense. And I found myself getting quite distressed for the monster in that scene. And again, similarly to when I watched the Phantom of the Opera, and you get to the end and you, despite all the atrocities he's performed, you feel quite bad for the Phantom at the end when they're all chasing him down. It's like, come on, let's just ease off a bit. So yeah, I found that very effective, that mass hysteria towards the end.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because I think movies from this time period into a morality tale of, is this the right way to treat this person, thing, however you want to describe them? And it's like you were saying, like, in a way, like, what happened with the girl is just a clear example of why probably he shouldn't have been brought to life. And
Yes.
again, it's through no fault of his own because he doesn't know any better. The real villain of the film is the creator and the one who decided to do it. And so, something you were saying earlier about the sets, I agree with that. I do like sets from this era. Like, they feel very lived in. And
yes.
I think also, I think maybe just because of the era it is, where maybe cinema was very close to, like, sort of stage, if you like close. Closer to stage than before it got like more cinematic later.
Yes,
Then I
absolutely.
think a lot of these sets feels like you will be watching it on stage, and obviously the style of acting is a bit more in tune with that, the more dramatic, stagey style acting you would get later on. But
absolutely,
of a happy ending for the creator. It's a bit weird when he's now going to get married, because I can't remember if she appears in the next film or not, but it just feels weird that they gave him a happy ending like that.
It is odd, isn't it? Almost like they're saying by the end of the movie, no, the creature, the monster is the bad guy, but Frankenstein is okay. I do admit that was a bit of an odd ending. Again, especially compared to the only one that I've seen, which is the 92 one, which I won't give any too big spoilers away because we will obviously review that one. But that one has a much less happy ending, let's just say. And that definitely felt more fitting. Now, I don't know how the book ends. Have you read the novel?
I've read some of it. I've not read all of it. I need to go back, and I'm just going to be a little controversial here and say I did find it a bit of a slog, and I know
fair enough.
everyone holds it up. But I will give it I think it's partly because they go so far into the science in the book, and that feels at times like at the expense of the story.
How the story ends and what themes that Mary Shelley actually built into her novel and what her initial ending was. See, I'm wondering if the happy ending for Frankenstein had more to do with the code surrounding movies at the time, and whether or not the studio dictated that the human must have a happy ending because the monster has been destroyed. It could very much be a reflection of that time. I mean, obviously as movies progress, as society progresses, we are able to put more and more morally grey things into movies. But back then, they didn't have a lot of area for grey. So it might just be a reflection of the period that it was made in, rather than a true reflection of the story itself. So yes, I would be very curious to find out how it ends in the book, because I will admit that was a bit of an odd ending. Like you pointed out, like Frankenstein is actually more of the villain than the monster. The monster is just a creature that doesn't understand its world and is responding with violence and fear, whereas Frankenstein deliberately, created this monster. He was told by his advisor not to do it. He was told by his friend not to do it. His fiance begged him not to do it. And I do think it's very telling that when the creature comes alive, his line is, "Now I know what it feels like." Odd, like the arrogance of him, not, now I know what it feels like to create life or something. No, now I know what it feels like to be God. It's like, dude, you're like really talking yourself up. So yes, I will admit it is odd to have that ending with this particular character who doesn't even really seem to show that much remorse for what he's done to this creature and for what he's done, pushing the buttons to the envelope too much. So I agree that it's a bit of an odd ending, but like I said, might just be a reflection. I mean, I don't think we were quite at the Hays Code yet in 1931, but it was not too far away. And, that dictated a whole lot of different moral standpoints that they had to put in films. So I'm wondering if that's what it was a reflection of.
We're at ratings time. What are you going to rate Frankenstein?
Well, look, I really enjoyed this film. I thought it was fun. I thought it was very effective with what it did, atmospheric, and the performances were good. Like we said, it did drag a little bit towards the end, and, it is an older film, so you do have to make allowances for that. But I think I'm going to go with a solid 8 out of 10 because I really did enjoy this. And if I rewatch it, that might even go up because I thought this was a very solid movie. And most effectively, I thought it was still effective today. You know how sometimes you watch older movies and because they're older movies, they've lost a bit of the shine, or you're just too used to modern gimmicks, so you don't get that same feeling. This one, I feel, gave me the same kind of feeling as I guess it would have even if I'd watched it in the 1930s. It was very disturbing, it was very atmospheric, and I thought it was effectively creepy. So I'm going to go with 8 out of 10 for this because I did quite enjoy it. What about you?
Yeah, and that's fair. It's definitely one which still holds up pretty much today. And yeah, talking about it, I think it's gone up a little bit for me as well, like just from what my score is. So I'm going to go with an 8 too.
Nice.
I'm going to say it now. I think the sequel might even be a bit better. We're taking the human side, maybe
Yeah.
more than they should be, but I could definitely see the themes in there as well, where they were showing that the monster was innocent and like just naive and sort of thrown into this, and yeah, just wasn't prepared, and all mob stuff. Like, you could read that one or two ways. Like, you could just read it as, okay, this is a villainous monster and they're getting revenge, or you could just read it as, yeah, you guys need to chill out, basically, and yeah, not overreact like that, because the scene itself, like, the guy has no way of knowing for sure than it was the monster who did it. Like,
Who
because he
killed his daughter?
carries the girl's
Exactly.
body
Yeah.
in town, and
Mm.
it's either Frank. Well, no, it's one of the villagers. I think just jumps
Yes.
to, okay, it must be the monster, because they
Yeah.
obviously know he's out loose. But, and I mean, okay, it proves to be the case, but they don't know that. Like, they
Exactly.
don't really have any evidence. Like, those are like small problems that don't really drag the film down too much.
No.
I think it's an effective film. It's a good introduction to the Frankenstein story.
Mm.
Like, if this is the first time you're seeing it on screen. So yeah, I would go with the 8 actually for.
Nice.
So that's Frankenstein, so the first one. So I think the plan is that we'll definitely do the original films from this like Universal franchise of it, so the sequels, and then we'll see after that. We'll definitely do, as I said, some of the later ones. So probably for a bonus episode, which I'll put on Patreon, I thought we could do Young Frankenstein, because
Yeah, that could be
that'll
fun.
be. Yeah, thanks for listening. Let us know what you thought of the movie in the comments below. Like and subscribe as always, and look out for more reviews throughout the month of October. Let us know what you've been watching if you want as well in the comments, and Rachel, if you want to plug your channel.
Guys, you can follow me, Rachel McDonald, video essays on TV shows and movies for the spooky season. I'm hoping to have some Halloween themed stuff up, so head over and check it out. And my Tumblr and Twitter are also linked through my YouTube, and Keith usually puts a link in the description. So come and follow me everywhere.
Thanks for watching, guys, and there's only one way to end, which is, it's alive! It's alive! My God, it's alive!
Oh, good stuff.